All right, so in continuance, it's all about this discussion of the towns and how they were now being treated, whereas before it was they were not really given, any power, and now all of a sudden they're having power to make taxes, etc. And I believe also the serfs, known as serfs or slaves, they're still as slaves. We'll see if they take them out of that as well. But long before this institution of communities in France, charters of immunity or franchise were granted to some towns and villages by the lords of whom they depended. These, however, were very different from such as became common in the 12th and 13th centuries. They did not erect these towns into corporations. They did not establish a municipal government. They did not grant them the privilege of bearing arms. They containing nothing more than a manumission of the inhabitants from the yoke of servitude. So some towns were not given that right. An exemption from certain services which were oppressive and ignominious, and the establishment of a fixed tax or rent which they were to pay to their lord in place of impositions which he could formally lay upon them at pleasure. 2 charters of this kind to 2 villages in the county of Roussillon, one in the year 974 and the other in 1025, are still extant. Such concessions, it is probable, were not unknown in other parts of Europe, and may be considered as a step towards the more extensive privileges conferred by Louis the Gros on the towns within his domains. The communities in France never aspired to the same independence with those in Italy, which also owed their origin to the fanatical folly of the Crusaders. So often, by the wife and benevolent dispensations of Providence, does good arise out of evil. They acquired new privileges and immunities, but the right of sovereignty remained entire to the king or baron, within whose territories the respective cities were situated, and from whom they received the charter of their freedom. A great number of these charters, granted both by the kings of France and by their great vassals, are published by M. de Archery in his Spicy Legium, and many are to be found in the collection of the Ordonnances des Rois de France. These convey a very striking representation of the wretched condition of cities previous to the institution of communities, when they were subject to the judges' appointment by their superior lords, of whom they held and had scarcely any other law but their will. Each concession in these charters must be considered as a grant of some new privilege, which the people did not formerly enjoy, and each regulation as a method of redressing some grievance under which they formerly laboured. The charters of community contain likewise the first expedients employed for the introduction of equal laws and regular government. On both these occasions they merit particular attention, and therefore we shall give our readers a view of some of the most important articles in these charters, under 2 general heads. Number one, such as respect personal safety, and number two, such as respect the security of property. During that state of turbulence and disorder which the corruption of the feudal government introduced into Europe, personal safety was the chief object of every individual, and as the great military barons alone were able to give sufficient protection to their vassals, this was one great source of their power and authority. But by the institution of communities, effectual provision was made for the safety of individuals, independent of the nobles. For number one, the fundamental article in every charter was that the members of it bound themselves by oath to assist, defend, and stand by each other against all aggressors, and that they should not suffer any person to injure, distress, or molest any of their fellow citizens. Number two, whoever resided in any town that was made free was obliged under the severe penalty to accede to the community and to take part in the mutual defense of its members. So if you're free, you have to still protect each other. The communities had the privilege of carrying arms, of making war on their private enemies, of executing by military force any sentence which was magistrates pronounced. The practice of making satisfaction by a pecuniary compensation for murder, assault, or other acts of violence, most inconsistent with the order of society, and the safety of individuals was abolished. And such was committed, these crimes were punished capitally, or with rigor adequate to their guilt. No member of a community was bound to justify or defend himself by battle or combat. But if he was charged with any crime, he could be convicted only by the evidence of witnesses and the regular course of legal proceedings. If any man is suspected himself to be in danger from the malice or enmity of another, upon his making of the oath to that effect before a magistrate, the person suspected was bound under a severe penalty to give security for his peaceable behaviour. This species of security is still known in Scotland under the name of la bourreuse. In France, it was first introduced among the inhabitants of communities, and having been found to contribute considerably towards personal safety, it was extended to all the other members of the society. The provisions in the charters of communities concerning the security of property are not less considerable than those respecting personal safety. By the ancient law of France, no person could be arrested or confined in prison on account of any private debt. If any person was arrested upon any pretext, but his having been guilty of a capital crime, it was lawful to rescue him out of the hands of the officers who had seized him. Freedom of arrest on account of debt seems likewise to have been enjoyed in other countries. In society, while it remained In its rudest and most simplest form, debt seems to have been considered as an obligation merely personal. Men had made some progress towards refinement before creditors acquired a right of seizing the property of their debtors in order to recover payment. The expedients for this purpose were all introduced originally in communities, and the gradual progress of them may be easily traced by an accurate observer. Number 1, the simplest and most obvious species of security was by that the person who sold any commodity should receive a pledge from him who bought it, which he restored upon receiving payment. Of this custom there are vestiges in several charters of community. Number 2, when no pledge was given and the debtor became refractory or insolvent, the creditor was allowed to seize his effects by force and by his own private authority. The citizens of Paris are warranted by the royal mandate. At ubicumque, they're saying ubicumque or quocumque modo proterunt tantum capiant unde percutiam. That's a little Latin there. Yes, percunium. Phoebe debitum integre e plenari habeant. There's nothing French here, I don't believe. Ondi Phoebe ondissem adjutere existant. I'll say. Maybe it is French in there, hiding. This rule practice, suitable only to the violence of the state of nature, was tolerated longer than one can conceive to be possible in any society, where laws and order were in any degree known. The ordinance authorizing it was issued in the year 1134, and that which corrects the law and prohibits creditors from seizing the effects of their debtors, unless by a warrant from a magistrate, and under his inspection, was not published until the year 1351. It is probable, however, that men were taught, by observing the disorders which the former mode of proceeding occasioned, to correct it in practice long before a remedy was provided by a law to that effect. New customs are not always to be ascribed to the laws which authorize them. These statutes only give a legal sanction to such things as the experience of mankind was previously found to be proper, and provision was made for attaching or distraining the movable objects of a debtor. And if Yeah, I don't know why I'm getting called on telephone. I'll have to end this for a moment. That would be unusual. All right. The ordinance authorizing it was issued in the year 1134, and that which corrects the law and prohibits creditors from seizing the effects of their debtors, unless by a warrant from a magistrate and under his inspection, which was not published unless, it wasn't published until the year 1351. That was a rephrase, sorry, I had to redo that one. It is probable, however, that men were taught, by observing the disorders which the former mode of proceeding occasioned, to correct it in practice long before a remedy was provided by a law to that effect. New customs are not always to be ascribed to the laws which authorize them. These statutes only give a legal faction to such things as a legal sanction to such things as the experience of mankind was previously found to be proper and beneficial. Number 3, as soon as the interposition of the magistrate became requisite, regular provision was made for attaching or distraining the movable effects of the debtor, and if his movables were not sufficient to discharge the debt, his movable property or estate in land was liable to the same distress, and was sold for the benefit of his creditor. As this regulation afforded the most complete security to the creditor, it was considered as so severe that humanity pointed out several limitations in the execution of it. Creditors were prohibited from seizing the wearing apparel of their debtors, their beds, the door of their house, their implements of husbandry, etc., upon the same principles when the power of distraining effects became more general. The horse of arms, here we are talking, the horse and arms of a gentleman could not be seized, so you could not take his horse and all his weapons. As hunting was the favorite amusement of martial nobles, the Emperor Ludovius Pius prohibited the seizing of a hawk on an account of any composition or debt. You can keep your hawk. But if the debtor had no other movables, even these privileged articles might be seized. Number 4, in order to render the security of property complete within a community, every person who was admitted, a member of it, was obliged to buy or build a house, or to purchase lands within its precincts, or at least to bring into the town a considerable portion of movables, perque jurisdicare posit, fi quid forte in cerale venerit. That number 5, that security might be as perfect as possible in some towns. The members of the community seem to have been bound for each other. Number 6, all questions with respect to property were tried within the community by magistrates and judges, which the citizens elected or appointed. Their decisions were more equal and fixed than the sentences which depended on the capricious and arbitrary will of a baron, who thought himself superior to all laws. Number 7, no member of a community could be burdened by an arbitrary tax, for the superior lord, who granted the charter of the community, accepted of a fixed census or duty in lieu of all demands. And there's the rule book here. Nor would the members of a community be distressed by an unequal imposition of the sum to be levied upon the community. Regulations are inserted into the charters of some communities concerning the method of determination, the quota of any tax to be levied on each inhabitant. St. Louis published an ordinance concerning this matter, which he extended to all the communities. These regulations are extremely favourable to liberty, as they vest the power of proportioning the laws in a certain number of citizens, chosen out of each parish, who were bound by a solemn oath to decide according to justice. That the more perfect security of property was one great object of those who instituted communities, we learn not from the nature of the thing, but from the express words of several charters, of which we shall only mention that granted by Eleonora, Queen of England and Duchess of Guienne, to the community of Poitiers, ut fua propria melius defendra possint, et magi integre custodir. Such are some of the capital regulations established in communities during the 12th and 13th centuries. These may be considered as the first rudiments of law and order, and contributed greatly to introduce regular government among all the members of society, as soon as communities were instituted. High sentiments of liberty began to appear. When Humbert, Lord of Beaujeu, upon granting a charter of community to the town of Belleville, exacted of the inhabitants an oath of fidelity to himself and successors, they stipulated on their part that he should swear to maintain their franchises and liberties. He should do that, and for their greater security they obliged him to bring 20 gentlemen to take the same oath and to be bound together with him. In the same manner, the Lord of Morin in Dauphiné produced a certain number of persons. Oh my gosh, they're attacking me. I'm sorry, I'm being spam attacked, I believe. All right, I'm going to have to turn this off. I have several days I get the same spam and I have to keep blocking the number, so I don't know why. They want to interrupt my book reading. Alright, now St. Louis published an ordinance concerning this matter, with which extended to all the communities. These regulations are extremely favourable. So we go down to that. That the more perfect security of property was one great object of those who instituted communities. We learn not only from the nature of things, but from the express words of several charters, of which we shall only mention that granted by Eleonora, Queen of England and Duchess of Guienne, to the community of Poitiers. Good heavens. More Latin. Fua propria melius defendere possinta et magri integre custodir. Such are some of the capital regulations established in communities during the 12th and 13th centuries. These may be considered as the first rudiments. You know what, I think I've already read this. I believe they've interrupted me so much today on purpose that they're just trying to end me, So I'm going to stop this and I'm going to get back to it right away. I'm very sorry for that. I'll try to figure out where I was really. All right, back again. If the mayor or chief magistrate of a town did any injury to a citizen, he was obliged to give security for his appearance in judgment, at the same manner as a private person, and if cast, was liable to the same penalty. These are ideas of equality uncommon in the feudal times. Communities were so favourable to freedom that they were distinguished by the name of libertate. They were at first extremely odious to the nobles, who foresaw what a check they must prove to their power and dominion. Guibert, abbot of Nogent, calls them execrable inventions, by which, contrary to law and justice, slaves withdrew themselves from that obedience which they owed to their masters. The zeal with which some of the nobles and powerful ecclesiastics opposed the establishment of community and endeavored to circumscribe their privileges was extraordinary. A striking instance of this occurs in the contests between the Archbishop of Rheims and the inhabitants of that community. It was the chief business of every archbishop during a considerable time to abridge the rights and jurisdiction of the community. And the great object of the citizens, especially when the fee was vacant, to maintain, to recover, and to extend their own jurisdiction. These observations concerning the state of cities and the condition of their inhabitants are confirmed by innumerable passages in the historians and laws of the Middle Ages. It is not improbable, however, that some cities under the First Order were in better state and enjoyed a superior degree of liberty. So we're starting to get into liberty all of a sudden. Under the Roman government, the municipal municipal government established in cities was extremely favorable to liberty, and the jurisdiction of the Senate in each corporation and the privileges of the citizens were both extensive. There is reason to believe that some of the greater cities, which escaped the destructive rage of the barbarous nations, still retained their ancient form of government, at least in a great measure. They were governed by a council of citizens and by magistrates whom they themselves elected. Very strong presumptions in favor of opinion are produced by M. l'Abbé de Bois. It appears from some of the charters of community to cities granted in the 12th and 13th centuries that these only confirm the privileges possessed by the inhabitants previous to the establishment of the community. Other cities claimed their privileges as being possessed them without interruption from the times of the Romans. But the number of cities which enjoyed such immunities was so small as by no means to diminish the importance of those charters granted by Louis the Gross as meritorious innovations. I have my bookmark handy this time. I'm really apologetic about the phone. I can't turn it off. I have a do not disturb on it, but I can't get to it fast enough to do that and then turn it back on again. I just can't. I'm sorry. So I lower it as low as possible. The kingdom soon felt the advantages arising from this beneficial change. The towns increased in population. The arts, the sciences, and commerce began to flourish. The new villages were built. Lands hitherto uncultivated were rendered fertile, and the emancipated hind took farms on his own account, and laboured for himself. The cities at length became so powerful and opulent that in order to engage them to contribute to the necessities of the state with less repugnance than they usually evinced, it was for the first time in 1304, but merely for the purpose of representing their wants and explaining their resources. The communities acquired greater honours in proportion as they furnished a greater number of forces in time of war. insensibly they formed a third body of government in the kingdom, who enjoyed in the national diets an equal or even superior authority to the nobility and clergy. It was denominated the Third Estate, tiers état, an appellation unknown in preceding times, when the nobles and ecclesiastics alone enjoyed the privilege of voting in the assemblies or parliaments. So here we are, we're getting into voting. Everything then, this is what makes everybody feel like, we're taking part, we have a vote. Everything then experienced a change, as well as the name of the assemblies, which were henceforth denominated States General, or Assemblies of the Three Estates, as their power and privileges, which were no longer the same as in early times, they never assembled but when the king pleased. But they never deliberated on questions of peace and war. They were only permitted to represent the people's grievances, to regulate subsidies and mode of levying them, or to appoint a regent when the deceased monarch had neglected to name one himself. This is no point with respect to which, as an English historian of eminence has justly remarked, the French antiquaries are more generally agreed than in maintaining that the State General had no suffrage in the passing of laws, and possessed no proper legislative jurisdiction. The whole tenor of the French history confirms this opinion. The form of proceeding in the States General was this: the king addressed himself to the whole body, assembled in one place, and laid before them the affairs on account of which he had summoned them. The deputies of each of the three orders, or of nobles or clergy, and clergy most likely, and of the Third Estate, the deputies of each of the three orders, they met apart and prepared their cahier, or memorial, containing their answer to the propositions with which had been made to them. So they're having like little private voting booths, together with the representations, not voting booths, more like voting group, together with representations which they had thought proper to lay before the king. These answers and representations were considered by the king in his council and generally gave rise to an ordinance. These ordinances were not addressed to the three estates in common. Sometimes the king addressed an ordinance to each of the estates in particular. Sometimes he mentioned the assembly of the three states. Sometimes mention is only made of the assembly of that estate to which the ordinance is addressed. Sometimes no mention at all is made of the assembly of estates, which suggested the propriety of enacting the law. Thus the States General had only the privilege of advising and remonstrating the legislative authority residing in the king alone. It was at this period that a taste for sophistry was introduced into the schools, where it passed from philosophy to theology and gave rise to the discussion of 1,000 perplexing questions, not less dangerous than subtle. There was not a single master or professor who taught any of the useful sciences, or the belles lettres, all that laid pretence to wit, or that boasted of their understanding. puzzled their brain with abstract speculations, and lost themselves in the labyrinths of metaphysics. The first who gave lessons in this kind of new logic was Roscelin of Compiègne, a man rendered famous by the numbers and magnitude of his errors. The celebrated Abélard, who was not less distinguished for the splendor of his genius, the elegance of his diction, the suavity of his manners, and the graces of his person, than for his ardent love and unparalleled misfortunes, was his disciple and successor. The high reputation which Abélard acquired excited the envy of his contemporaries, and the subtlety of his arguments procured his condemnation by the Council of Soissons. He was accused by some of teaching that there were three gods, and by others of not enforcing a necessary discrimination between the three persons of the Trinity. In vain did he request the Pope's legate order a judicial examination of his work. In vain did he offer to correct whatever might be deemed reprehensible. It was decided that the book should be condemned without any farther examination, and the unfortunate author was compelled to commit his own work to the flames. In order to justify the irregularity of this proceeding, it was said that the doctor's audacity in reading his treatise in public before it had been approved by the Pope was a sufficient reason for condemning it, as if any fault of the author could vitiate the work. I'm not sure if any of that was understood. Abélard had also studied under Anselm of Laon, one of the greatest theologians of the age, and under William de Champeaux, afterwards Bishop of Châlons-upon-Maine. I would like the laws and the rules to be over with, because this is not really supposed to be a legal book, but oh gosh, that's it. This is the last page, and then I'll end this one and write down. This is a lot of legal laws, so don't get into it unless you are interested. Abélard also studied under Anselm of Laon, one of the greatest theologians of the age, and under William de Champeaux, afterwards Bishop of Châlons-upon-Maine, who was called the Column of the Doctors. William for a long time taught rhetoric, logic, and theology in the cloister of the cathedral at Paris. He then retired to an old chapel dedicated to Saint Victor, where he founded a community of regular canons, which establishment was confirmed by letters patent from Louis the Gros in 1113, who was also liberal in his benefactions to it. There were two other celebrated orders, likewise instituted during this reign, one in the desert of Vosage, in the environs of Leon, and the other in a retired spot near Muret, in the diocese of Limoges. The first assumed the title of Prémontré, from a part of desert, and the white dress then worn by clerks. The second took the appellation of Grandement, with the black habit worn by recluses. The Prémontré wore nothing but woolen, ate only 1 meal a day, and observed a perpetual silence. They were very charitable to the poor. Their founder was a German gentleman named Norbert, an illustrious birth and highly favoured at the court of Henry V, Emperor of Germany. So, the Grand Montaines were at first neither priests, monks, nor hermits, but a simple community of penitents, who were often obliged to interrupt their devotions in order to beg the common necessaries of life. They lived in a state of such extreme mortification that when the Pope confirmed their institution, he was obliged to moderate its austerity. Stephen, Viscount of Thiers in Auvergne, was the founder of this order, and Grandmont in the Limousin, the chief place of its residence. Okay, so somehow now we've got these interesting people in their white dresses, and they only eat once a day. They're wearing woolen outfit, and they are very charitable to the poor. So, go figure. Anyway, so all of that legal. I hope the book doesn't continue this way. That would be awful. Oh.